success of the mission to take out Osama Bin Laden raises some difficult questions. Perhaps the most difficult: is torture ever justified to get essential information? Joining me now is Alan Dershowitz, author of The Trials of Zion, and Colonel Maurice Davis, former chief prosecutor at Guantanamo. Let me start with you, Colonel. You are firmly against the use of waterboarding. Why?
Well, we've always considered it torture. We're a party to the Convention Against Torture. We've prosecuted people in the past for waterboarding as an act of torture, and we wouldn't condone it if others did it. We shouldn't condone it when we do it.
I mean, President Bush insisted that he did it within the law, and that if it hadn't been deemed lawful, he wouldn't have authorized it.
Well, essentially, I think it's called plausible deniability, where John Yoo, who wrote the memo, said, look, I'm just a lawyer. I didn't make the decision. President Bush then says, look, I'm not a lawyer. I relied on their advice. So the buck has to stop somewhere. You know, somebody needs to be accountable for the decision.
And obviously, you know, many Americans, in the emotion of Bin Laden being killed, when they hear that potentially, you know, crucial information was secured from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed via waterboarding, they're going to be thinking, good, we should carry on using it.
Well, that's easy to say when it's somebody like Osama Bin Laden or Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, when the shoe is on the other foot. If we're not willing to condone it when it's done to one of us, then we shouldn't condone it when we do it to others. That's what Representative King said. You know, on September 10th, if we'd have had information about September 11th, would we have used waterboarding? Well, the fallacy in that argument is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was waterboarded in 2003. The raid took place in 2011. It was 8 years later, after a lot more work was done. So to argue that waterboarding is what led to this result is a real stretch in logic.
Alan Dershowitz, you disagree with this. You're in favor of these interrogation techniques. Where is the line drawn as far as you're concerned?
Well, first of all, I think waterboarding is torture. I don't condone the use of torture, but where I fundamentally disagree with the Colonel is I believe that torture sometimes works. It was Leon Panetta who said today on another news channel that it was waterboarding and other methods of enhanced interrogation that led...
If it works, should you use it?
Well, I don't think it should be used, but I think we ought to know that we are sacrificing a great deal. We probably would not have gotten Osama bin Laden if we had completely complied with all of our treaty obligations. What we did is we waterboarded, that helped us. We wiretapped without warrants, that helped us. We invaded a foreign country, that helped us. We probably shot a man who was not resisting in cold blood. That resulted in the targeted killing. We did a great many things that compromise our legal situation, and we have to have a great debate. What we shouldn't do is believe, I think, the Pollyannish view that these things don't work.
No, I get it, but I'm a bit confused where you sit on this debate. Are you in favor of it then or not?
I am not in favor of it, but I understand why many Americans would favor of it. What I'm not in favor of completely is denying the reality that these work, that when we apply the Constitution, we give up efficiency and effectiveness. What the Colonel is suggesting is there's a free lunch. You can comply completely with the highest standards of all of these rules, and you have no loss of efficiency. That is simply a false statement.
I mean, Colonel, there are clearly very dangerous people at Guantanamo. Not all of them, and I have big issues with some of the people being held there where there's no evidence at all, but there are some where it seems to be incontrovertible. How do you get this kind of information out of implacable enemies who are prepared to die for their cause if you're not going to use some form of aggressive interrogation?
Well, if you bought into the last administration's argument that everyone at Guantanamo was the worst of the worst, the kind of people that would chew through the hydraulic lines of the airplane to kill Americans, then waterboarding perhaps would not be considered unacceptable. But as you know, and as the world knows, there were a lot of people at Guantanamo that didn't fit that description. So we don't have that 100% moral certainty that...
I understand that. But I mean, you know better than most because you were one of the people running the place. You must have felt in your guts that a lot of these people there were bad people and potentially, if they were released, would be plotting more atrocities. What do you do to get that information out of them?
Well, Piers, I agree. There's some incredibly bad people at Guantanamo that need to be there for as long as possible, or at least confined somewhere for as long as possible. but to engage in what we've always called torture. We're a party to the Convention Against Torture that says there is no justification whatsoever for torture. So if we don't mean what we say when we enter into those kind of commitments, then we need to repudiate that treaty and just ignore international law, which is what we've been doing.
But let's then acknowledge that when we comply with these treaties, we're going to be the only country in the world that does it. Every country tortures, every country would torture.
But that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that it's the wrong thing to do. I mean, when you're fighting a moral war, as we have been against Saddam Hussein, against Osama Bin Laden, when we position ourselves as better people,
that's right,
then surely we have to behave in a better way, don't we?
And we have to pay the consequences. And the consequences mean that we do not catch Osama bin Laden, that we do not prevent certain preventable acts of terrorism. If we're prepared to pay those prices, then we are really a better country. We are not a better country if we pretend to be prepared to pay those prices, but hypocritically, below the radar, we actually do all of these things because we want to have our cake and eat it too. That's the position we're in now. We say we're against torture. We would torture if we had the 9/10 hypothetical that Congressman King set out. We did use the information we elicited from waterboarding. We continue to wiretap without warrant, and we shot a man in cold blood without giving him an opportunity to surrender, and we all think that was terrific. Let's face reality. We're a bunch of hypocrites, and that's probably necessary when you live in a real world with terrible people. You want to comply with the highest standards, but you also want to achieve the ends. You can't do that.
Respect for the rule of law has always been our strong suit, and for the last decade we've run from the law to avoid it. This is an opportunity to reset and get back on the right track and quit living in fear.
So, Colonel, let me ask you a question. Would you then have not authorized the shooting of Osama bin Laden if they found him unarmed and not resisting, which is apparently what really happened? Would you have said we should not have shot him then?
Well, that's the rule of law. I think you're making a huge assumption there. There's a 40-minute firefight. They've had suicide bombers. They've had any number of acts. To have to pat him down, I think, would be absurd. I think they acted in reasonable good faith to believe that he was a threat, and they took out the threat.
I'm going to have to leave this fascinating debate there. What I want to ask you both very quickly, let me start with you, Colonel. Should we publish the picture of a dead Osama bin Laden?
I don't, as someone mentioned earlier, I don't think there's any debate about the fact that he's dead, and I think just putting the picture up doesn't do us any good.
Alan Dershowitz?
We should publish the picture, and we should not have buried him at sea. We should have brought his body to the United States. When people die in this country, they have autopsies, no matter what their religious rules were. We're much too deferential to Islamic law on this issue.
Thank you both very much. When we come back, will the killing of Osama bin Laden be a turning point in Barack Obama's presidency?